Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Good morning. I don't know how they do it. I don't know how the senators are able to sit hour after hour after hour. I did read an important article that was raised with regards to this process of the Senate trial, and it was about the amount of candy that the senators are eating during this ongoing experience. I also read that they're not permitted anything but water or milk in the Senate chamber. They're not permitted to have cell phones or any electronic devices. They have to just sit there. And has been reported, some have been caught passing notes. And I remember my days in college, the 3-hour classes. I don't know how they endure 8 hours, day after day. And I have to say to myself, they should be sitting attentively listening, because this is a critical moment in the history of our nation. But how is it possible to sit for that long and keep listening? I already see how edgy people are, and I've only been speaking for a minute. I just want to remind some of you and inform others who don't know this. My father on a regular Shabbat morning would speak for 40 minutes. He would regularly speak for over an hour on the high holidays. And I long to be that man. Did you get the joke? Long to be? All right, good. Just want to make sure all of my jokes are landing properly. And my father and I often had that argument about Moshe and Miriam. When Miriam gets leprosy and Moshe prays on her behalf, he says, Ilna Rifana La, God, please heal her, 5 words. My father says, what a pathetic prayer. He couldn't have mustered more. And I always said, less is more. And you don't have to go on and on in order to make your point, but I've already strayed off topic too far. If last week's Parsha was about seeing, that the midwives saw the pain of the Jewish people, Miriam sends her brother off and he is spotted, he is seen by Pharaoh's daughter. When Moses grows up, he sees the suffering of his fellow Jews, and he responds. If last week's Parsha was about seeing, this week's Parsha is about listening. As we develop as a nation, we fine-tune our senses to what's going on in the world. And so it says at the beginning of this week's Parsha, V'gam ani shamati et na'akat b'nei Yisrael. God heard the cry of the Jewish people. Shamati et na'akat b'nei Yisrael. God doesn't see the suffering, God hears the suffering. Vaydaber Moshe kain el b'nei Yisrael v'lo shamu el Moshe. And Moses' fear is that while God can hear the Jewish people, that no one's going to listen to him. Of course, he says that he has a speech impediment. It must be his fault that no one will listen to him. But that's the fear. I know for some of you, the greatest fear is that you'll throw a party and no one will come. But for a rabbi, it's that he'll speak and no one will listen. Bo, daber el paro melech Mitzrayim vayishlach et bnei Yisrael me'artzo. God responds, he says, you're going to go there, you're going to speak, Pharaoh's going to listen, he's going to respond, and the Jewish people will be saved. And then Moses says, Vaydaber Moshe livnei Adonai lemor hein b'nei Yisrael v'lo shamu elai. But what about my own people? They're not going to listen to me. They're going to come up with any number of excuses as to why. I'm not one of them. I'm not really a Jew who suffered the bondage, the slavery, the horrific life of being a slave. So why would they listen to me? Moses' greatest fear in the world is that he won't be heard. Moses is a man of action. When he sees suffering, he uses his hands. When he sees the Jewish people dying of thirst, he hits a rock. Moses is a man of action, not a man of speech. And so he's so afraid that no one's going to listen to him. You know what it feels like not to be heard. You know what it feels like to be invisible. That you're not being listened to. You know the greatest, most powerful response you can have to someone is to say, I hear you. That's why it becomes the very mantra, the very greatest statement of faith for our people. Shema Yisrael, listen. Because our capacity to hear each other is the most powerful response we can have. To just hear what someone else is saying. When I was growing up as a child going to services on Friday night, there was regularly a prayer that was offered in the Siddur that we used at the time called Likrat Shabbat. And there was one sentence in that prayer book that always caught my attention. It says, if you go to the symphony and your mind is on business, you listen, but you don't really hear. You know what that feels like? To allow your mind to wander and not be listening. And when someone says to you, do you listen to what I'm saying? Can you hear what I'm saying? You can repeat the words. But you weren't really listening. We know what it feels like in our own lives not to be heard. And that's why the Zohar says the greatest problem that exists in the world is the exile of the word, says Aviva Zornberg. The exile of the word. It means that we put stuff out, but it falls on deaf ears. Moses is afraid that he'll put what he wants out into the universe and it will fall flat. No one will hear him. You know the very famous philosophical dilemma. If a tree falls in a forest and there's no one around, does it make a noise? We feel that same way all the time in our own personal lives. We feel as though we speak, but we're not being heard. And so we feel invisible, coupling the two senses, sight and sound. So the Zohar teaches us something really interesting. Reb Chia says in the Zohar, 30 days before a nation rises to power or is overtaken by calamity, the event is announced to the world. That is to say, we can see it coming. We can see when nations are rising and nations are falling. We can see it coming. And so the Zohar says sometimes it's transmitted through the mouths of children, sometimes through the people who have no sense, sometimes the word is transmitted through the mouths of birds who announce to the world yet no one notices. We walk through life all the time deaf to what surrounds us. All the time we walk through life thinking about other things and being unaware of the announcements surrounding us. Gam shamat na'akat b'nei Yisrael. God heard the cries of the people. How often do we walk through life and not hear the cry of the people? How often do we walk through life and not notice the birds that are singing? How often do we walk through life and not hear the cries of little children or the laughter they bring? Because we're so distracted by the static in our own lives. The noise that is the background. Shema Amiva Dabera, says the psalmist, listen so that I can talk. Listen so that I can talk. My favorite book ever written. Speak so your children will listen, and listen so your children will speak. Says a magnificent author about what it means to learn to speak because you know someone's listening to you. And then, one chapter later, V'lo yishma lechem paro. Pharaoh doesn't listen to Moses. V'yichazek et leiv paro. His heart gets hard. V'lo shama alehem. And he doesn't hear him. And the cycle repeats. What happens in our lives is we become slaves to patterns of the past. I wasn't heard before, so why should I speak now? They never listen anyway, so why should I bother? Is the refrain we play in our own heads. And so I say to you this morning, break the pattern, sever the cycle, and start listening so that others will speak. And start speaking in a way so that others will listen. The only thing we can do is say to ourselves that there is something better on the horizon. That a future is better than a past because we can break that pattern of ignorance and of ignoring. If we're going to make this world a better place, as Frida has taught us so beautifully this morning, we're going to have to learn to listen to each other better. And do whatever you have to do. Maybe it's suck on a candy. Maybe it is have a glass of water. But learn how to listen, or we'll never make this world a better place. Shabbat Shalom.